The Manchester server is now a fully active PvP zone. This is why PvP was added and which clan to definitely avoid. So everyone knows that the centre of the Manchester POI, Crocodile Gardens, is the main spawn for PvP players. Although we have always seen the Homeless clan dominating this POI, this clan seems to be getting bigger. But here's the thing, these players are not the meta anymore, because recently a new player class has spawned in the gardens and it's completely taken over the game. The VPN player. These players use a VPN to server hop into the UK servers and then free roam in the main POIs. VPN players are becoming increasingly more aggressive to normal passive players, and it seems like the server mods don't care. These players also tend to lurk in massive clans, so landing in Crocodile Gardens solo is not advised. Good luck and have fun.
Did not expect this for your first day.
Hey, eyes up here.
Wow.
9:21.
Oh my god, girl! Your first time? That was really good!
You're going dog nuts. I mean,
Ready, girl?
Yes!
Sydney Sweeney has great splits.
Those last two shots on top of each other.
You see what I did there, right?
I'd be really proud if I were you. Yeah.
for your first day, that's pretty good.
Thank you.
Where do you want to find it? Right under the window. Oh, that's cool. Oh, yeah.
Cool, thank you, Sydney.
Nice, of course, thank you.
Good evening and start of your weekend, everyone. It's good to see you all back. I am your host, CG. Yeah, tonight it's just me. And we're going to be covering the usual stuff. I'm going to go through the show notes, or the usual stuff at the beginning of the show for everyone that may be new here. We are currently broadcasting on Odyssey, Rumble, Entropy, YouTube, and X, or Twitter. And for anyone on YouTube, we're going to do the front half of the show with a Warcast PowerPoint, some articles, and then we'll do some combat footage, which YouTube would probably not like us to do, over on the other platforms. So those where free speech still is able to be done, and that's where we'll continue the show. So continue watching us over there if you wish. Yeah, okay, guys. And our usual, our chat is also at t.me/Radio Room Chat, and the channel where I put out my thoughts is also on Telegram at t.me/The Warcast. I keep saying I need to get back on X. But, yeah, anyway, I think you'll understand my hesitancy. Alright, so, a lot of stuff to talk about this last week. Let me bring up my show notes here. At the top of everything is the round 4, I think now, of negotiations, this time in Anchorage, Alaska. Last time Anchorage had a foreign delegation, I think it was with Biden and delegation from China, I think, if I remember reading that correctly. Anyway, though he was in San Francisco also, Xi Jinping, so. Either way, it's gonna be a shit show, to be honest. How to put it? We have to go off precedence on this again because we have to see how people behave and what would likely be the most probable outcome for these negotiations, which is probably going to be nothing. Between Ukraine and Russia, there's obviously still too much negotiation friction for them to reach any sort of real ceasefire position. And Trump is in a weird spot where he wants to earn his self-aggrandizement for a Nobel Peace Prize. He thinks he's on his way to doing that, but at the same time, there's no way this war is going to be settled within the next few weeks, unfortunately. The reason why I am saying this is because just recently, I think 2 weeks ago, um, Trump settled the Armenian-Azerbaijan dispute, supposedly. There's a lot of conclusions coming out of that. A lot of it's still being developed also in either nation's respective domestic fronts. Again, I don't really know too much about the domestic politics of Azerbaijan, which are pretty simplified because there's a dictatorship there. But then, Armenia is a very old, ancient land, but very small population, and their prime minister Nikol Pashinyan. A lot of people are considering that his whole stretch of negotiations with the Azeris has been nothing more short than a capitulation. So what we can use from that negotiation, you can see where I'm going with this, with Russia and Ukraine, is that Trump doesn't really care about the outcome as long as there is a conclusion, as long as there's a deal. Um, in this case, there was a smaller country with I would say, legitimate claim to Nagorno-Karabakh, in this case, Armenia, but it wasn't, quote, internationally recognized, unquote, by the world community because those borders were set by the USSR. For some reason, Western liberals still honor Soviet borders, i.e., Moldova. So who knows? The hypocrisy of these people is baffling. Anyway, so the Azeris take over Nagorno-Karabakh, do nothing short of than ethnically cleansing that whole land, churches, the Armenians, the cultural institutions of those areas, the old parliament that they had in I want to say It's not Tashkent. I forgot the name of the capital they had there, but they destroyed. I think they destroyed the parliament there that the Armenians set up. It's about 500,000 people in that enclave altogether. They now fled over to the homeland of Armenia, and yeah, there's a lot of people are pissed off about that, especially in the Armenian diaspora. It seems like so. Um, it's predictable that the Armenian lobby in many Western nations is going to try to sabotage this peace deal and not have it recognized by many Western nations. I I don't have a real horse in that race, to be frank. But at the same time, it's if we look at Ukraine and Russia, we arguably do in the Western world. And Trump doesn't really care, I think, ultimately how the peace is settled in Ukraine as long as there's a peace. And again, it goes to his aggrandizement because he wants to get a big gold star on his chest there from the liberal establishment for some reason. It's just a bit of irony, his sense of humor, I suppose. Um, so if we're looking at the way the negotiations being set up, let me bring up a couple of maps here. I want to show you some of the demands that Trump, uh, Putin is demanding of Ukraine because nothing's really changed. He wants the four oblasts recognized as territory, and with that, he doesn't want Ukraine going into NATO. He wants neutrality. He doesn't want them getting arms. All the usual shit. His stance hasn't changed, and really neither has Ukraine. So to their credit, they haven't really budged at all. So both parties have really not done anything to really change their stance. The realities on the ground, as the Russians like to say, hasn't swayed many people from doing anything else other than just fight for their home. So let me start with this map here. So this is from ISW. They did a really good synopsis on the proposed Ukrainian concessions that is going to have to be given by the Ukrainians to the Russians, though. So what they're highlighting here is really the eastern part of Ukraine for the most part. So they didn't really do a good job of highlighting Zaporizhzhia city here, but which is right here, obviously. But it shows the urbanization of these areas also, and what would be a vulnerability for Ukraine to concede these territories to the Russians. The reason being, let me go to another map here. So GIF. Yeah, so between these two maps, let me see here. I'll bring that up and then that up. So again, you're seeing what they have right now and then what they'd have to give up. And what's been developing in this area here is that the Ukrainians been holding pretty hard, and the fortress city has not even been attacked yet directly, the fortress city belt. And behind that, there is just open land for the most part. It's not as densely populated as a lot of the Donetsk Oblast is. And from what we've also seen with trends in the war, the Russians have developed some, I would how to put it. I'm trying to say it correctly here, but I'll just say it. They've developed effective means of maneuvering in fields to fields, and then from bocage to bocage, basically, and make it slow gains when they can. But this is mainly just due to the lack of manning that Ukraine is able to muster in this sector. They're having to cover the entirety of the front between Belarus and Russia, and if anyway, there are ways to get around that, but no Western nations are really stepping up like they need to. Point being is if the Russians get behind these fortress cities here, it's likely that they could probably expand further a little bit quicker than we're used to seeing. So that would be the negotiation friction for them not to concede this land to the Russians. And obviously, the Russians would want the rest of Zaporizhzhia, which include a city of 750,000 people pre-war, I think. Yeah, so the biggest city that they, yeah, I think Mariupol was smaller. Yeah, so they anyway, goes without saying, and Kherson obviously too, but they were kicked out across the Dnieper River there, so that is just not a point that they can even push on, I think, negotiation-wise for the Russians. Okay, so that is the tenuous position that I think both Russia and well, damn tenuous. The Russians and Ukrainians are trying to like push back on against. And what happened also during the course of these negotiations leading up to this whole thing on the 15th, because that's when they're supposed to be meeting. Sorry, I'm trying to bring this up here too. I'm sorry, 1 second, guys. I apologize. I'm trying to get all this worked out here. That is not it. That is something else. Okay. That is the story. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this was a story I want to share with you though. So Witkoff, who is Trump's quote Middle East envoy, um, God, he is the worst diplomat I've seen in quite some time. He hasn't really settled the thing with the Houthis. He didn't settle anything with the Iranians until military intervention happened, and now he's trying to settle this whole thing with the Ukrainians and Russians. He wasn't even really involved in the Azeri and Armenian negotiations. That was mainly done between them bilaterally. Um, Sorry, last thing I want to talk about the Armenians and Azeris. Let me just bring up a map here because it is worth showing on a map here because it is a bit of geography I have to show you. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a little bit tough to see here, but we're going to try this nonetheless. Let me just close this out really quick. Bring up the territories that is actually what Trump negotiated also in this whole thing. So let me do the transition here. And yeah, so the interesting part about that is it's a lot of brown area here, but this is Nagorno-Karabakh roughly in this area right here. And now this is all recognized as Nakhchivan was the name of the capital, sorry. This now is Azeri land, but there's this area right here that's called the Zangezur Corridor. And the reason why that's important is because Armenia is in an interesting position geographically speaking because this Nakhchivan, no, sorry, Nakhchivan was, okay, that's not the right name. Nakhchivan is the other enclave of Azeris sitting opposite that is um, separated from Azerbaijan itself by Armenia here. Armenia sits on this area, and then there's this whole enclave of Azeris that borders Iran too. But it's also the border to Turkey. So the Azeris and Turks are part of a greater movement of what do they call it, like greater Turkmen, whatever. There's this vision that Turkey has under Erdogan and some other Turkish leaders that they want to connect all of the Turkish world. That means the Kazakhs, the Uzbeks, the Turkmen, the Azeris, the actual Turks and Turkey, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and all that though. So this entire area they want to kind of set up their own like free trade zone, but that's all broken up because the biggest economy obviously is Turkey between all of these. A lot of the resources are in this area too. But Armenia, to the chagrin of all these people, breaks that up with this Zangezur corridor. So this is where Trump steps in. So the Russians originally were sitting on this piece of land right here, um, trying to peacekeep the area between the Azeris so they can travel between these two areas. Uh, Trump in the negotiations, this is the only thing he really added to the negotiations, that said the Americans now are going to be putting themselves in this area, which to me is kind of crazy. I mean, I'll get to a few more conclusions there. He wanted one not to get us involved in any more wars. He settled one, I guess, but he's putting American lives right in the middle of another potential conflict zone. Um, and where the support's going to come from, it has to come from Turkey, but Turkey's tenuous NATO ally at best on a good day. Um, so that's going to be interesting. So we got another little zone here that's just in the middle of the South Caucasus, right next to Iran, and in between two very ancient blood feuds, right between the Armenians and Azeris, and the Russians just being in the neighborhood too. I can't think of a real more remote area if you want to put Americans than right here. So for the Turks in this area, that's a win, actually, because Azerbaijan is friends with Israel because Israel gave the Azeris a lot of drones to go and destroy the Armenian army with in their first little fight most recently, I think in 2020. And yeah, so between the Israeli lobby, the United States, and the Azeris, that little deal was able to manifest. Armenia, at the same time, isn't really cozying up to the Russians because Russia failed to fulfill their CSTO obligations, defending them against the Azeri invasion. So now they're looking for new friends, so they're trying to cozy up to the Americans too. So we have this weird lobby effort between both parties to get more favorable um, dispositions from the American troops that are going to be stationed here, basically. Um, that's a bit of interesting politics there too, a little bit economic. So with this corridor being monitored and governed essentially by the Americans, the Turks can now start planning on linking Turkey with a rail line through Nakhchivan to Baku, and then using the Caspian Sea to link the rest of the greater Turkic world in Central Asia. So that's going to be a whole different economic Silk Road shit, right? Um, anyway, so that is actually fairly interesting how that's going to develop. What else was I going to mention about that? I think that really covers it. Oh, well, and Iran, obviously. Iran should be discounted out of this whole thing, though, because Americans being on the border, again, with the Iranians, but it's such a small, I mean, how big, how much distance is that right there? So from this point to, say here, that's about 70 kilometers, 69 kilometers, really, at best. And in very hilly country, though. That's not really anywhere for the Iranians to worry about, but they're going to be seeing American flags on their border. So that's going to be interesting. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the last thing I wanted to say about that, though. But using those negotiations, with what we're seeing in Alaska, that sets a unfortunate precedent to where the weaker party, well, perceived weaker party is what I should say, really, um, is going to probably get, well, according to Trump, he wants to just force the weaker party to give up any concessions that he can out of them, and also for the larger party, which is usually the aggressor, to cozy up to him. So that's his sort of New York real estate mob mentality take on that. So, but yeah, back to the other article there. So, kind of getting back into the whole Witkoff shit here, which is the name of the show, really. Witkoff's Wit. He misunderstood what Putin was talking about. As we've documented on the show almost ad infinitum, Putin has always asked for the Ukrainians to leave the so-called annexed oblasts that are under their control, is what they keep saying, which are not, again, not recognized as legitimate. Those elections are bullshit, all that crap, right? So with this idea, he thought that Russia was saying they were going to leave Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. No, it was Putin saying to him that no, the Ukrainians have to leave Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, like they've always said. And this kind of threw the Ukrainian info space into a 180 tailspin almost, because they were like, "What's going on?" Like now we're hearing that Luhansk and Donetsk and Crimea is all he wants. But yeah, anyway, people really didn't know how to digest that information, which is why I like having a 1 day a week format. You have all these people trying to give you their hot takes, and they started saying all this bullshit. I don't think they had good information to operate off of. But this was reported by Bild, which is a German outfit here. I do have the article right here, though. Let me do this, though. It's a fairly short article, but this was the source if you guys are interested. Um, yeah, eh, I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing for them to get mixed up on, but Witkoff is so incompetent that he doesn't even understand where the lines on the map are going to be settled. And that's so dangerous because this is involving millions of lives and the millions of lives that have been sacrificed in this, well, whether they're maimed or killed, you know what I'm saying. The many people that have sacrificed in this war because this bullshit connection that Trump has to, I think it was a Florida State real estate guy. I have to look at his background again, but yeah, he just an absolute stooge of a man and a dumbass. He has anyway. Fuck, dude. This is the problem with this administration. He hires only loyalists and not competent people, and this guy's incompetence and not settling any wars and fucking bungling these negotiations time and time again. I just don't know how this reality just doesn't make sense sometimes. So some people believe that the simulation is breaking down. Sometimes I just have to kind of nervously laugh and agree at the same time. Um, anyway, so that's one thing. We got a few more things to talk about. Um, yeah, there was also two nuke subs stationed off the Russian coast just prior to the spin up to these negotiations. So that might have forced Russia's hand a little bit. I really don't know how to read that because it was Medvedev just tweeting again, in his sort of drunken stupors again, talking about the dead hand or dead man switch, which we talked about last week. I won't get into that again. But then this happens, and at the same time in the Russian info space, they were saying, "Oh, Medvedev doesn't really make any decisions. He's just running on his mouth. It's really Papa Putin that makes the real decisions." Blah blah blah. Nothing really revelatory about any of that, but they were seemingly trying to sidestep and backtrack a little bit. So maybe we'll see a change in the nuclear rhetoric, at least directed toward Trump's administration from the Russians. I don't know, but we'll see. That was just a weird bit of political drama, and fuck the professionalism of Putin's people and Trump's people. It just makes, I think it makes a lot of people pay attention to this shit nervous. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of people paying attention to this shit anymore. And lastly, guys, since we're just talking about all this stuff, let me just bring up the map again. We'll just start off with that here too. In the Donetsk area here has actually been getting fairly difficult for the Ukrainians. I do also think that a lot of people fell for another Russian psyop. I don't know how else to put it. There was supposedly a breakthrough near Dibropelia, if I remember right. We'll get down to there in a minute, but I just want to kind of cover the map like we usually do, clockwise, north to south. Nothing really new out of this area here. Ukrainians are still holding up fairly well in the Sumy Oblast, and some success of them pushing towards the international border again. So yeah, nothing really big. The 425th Scala and 225th have been really doing some work in this area. Um, there is some disturbing things I keep hearing about the connections between Searsky and a lot of his people. I do keep hearing about, and this again, just one-off things I hear from random sources on the telegrams, that Searsky is putting in some of his old buddies that rely on old Soviet tactics and don't respect the lives of their men sometimes. And the way his commanders are being selected and the units that are being propped up in the info space sometimes, like the 425th and 225th, their commanders are supposedly well connected to Searsky. And then we also have from Jerome, who writes for Military Land, how Belitsky and Prokopenko are having issues trying to rotate their units into areas that they need to be in, to change the facts on the ground instead of, not to say that there's one area more important than any, but I think we can all say that dumping the 3rd Assault Brigade in Nadia, which I'm trying to find again, right here, not really important. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, like, I'm not trying to undersell any of this though, but like, this isn't really strategically valuable to the greater picture of the war, though. Maybe near Kupiansk or Sumy or Donetsk, where they have been, where they fought in, Klishchivka, near Bakhmut. I'm trying to find, yeah, Klishchivka right here, right? Anyway, back in 2023, but no, they get rotated to a fairly innocuous sector west of Svatove. Um, I don't know. I think there's a lot of politics going on that I'm just not really happy with the Ukraine General Staff, but that's just my opinion. Um, I always say, I talk to people over there all the time, and a good number of them have confidence in Searsky, and their opinions are more well-founded than mine, to be honest. But just looking from my point of view, from the things I read, from what I see on the ground, all this other stuff, I have my opinions on that too still, and I just feel that Searsky isn't really, he doesn't inspire confidence in me. At least that's all I'll say. So yeah, moving over to the Kharkiv sector. Nothing really new out of Staritsia or Hilboke or Lukyansky. Still major gray man area here. Drones being used on both sides, mainly the Ukrainians for that sector though. Some reports of the Russians making some progress in the aggregate plant sector here. But again, we're looking at this little bit right here versus the rest of the aggregate plant and looking at the rest of Vovchansk. So you're looking at maybe a few dozen square meters, basically. So anyway, nothing really new out of Milove. That was kind of a distraction move that's just been kind of sitting there. Unfortunately, well, actually, some good news and some weird news out of this area too. Depending on which map you use, this is again the latest map we use for the show here. Um, so the Russians did hold on in Kindrashivka here. The Ukrainians did successfully counterattack in this area, and according to some reports, took back Kindrashivka and pushed the Russians back to the Roscoe River for the most part. Russians still hold a little bit of the north here of Kupiansk. So it's good to see that Ukrainians are still capable of counteroffensive operations in this area to dislodge Russians from urban areas. So that's good. The sooner they could knock out this leg and the Russians and send them back to the river, the better it's going to be for the whole front. So that's good. Nothing new out of Senkove. Nothing really new out of Radhoredka, and nothing a whole lot going on in this sector. The Russians broke through months ago, kind of moved into this area, but nothing really critically has been going on. They kind of been rotating, from my understanding, for the readings I have, rotating people from this sector over to Donetsk. They're still making creeping advances a little bit, tree line by tree line, as you can see here. But, just ground for the sake of ground. Um, the stuff going on in Seversk hasn't changed too much in the last week. Russians are still launching mainly from, it looks like, Topolivka, and some of the areas out here. I haven't seen a whole lot of action out of Belhorivka here, though. Or, yeah, Belhorivka. Yeah, I hate seeing them lose this sector because they've been fighting so well in this sector for such a long time. But the operational goal for the Russians in this area is to take Seversk, start using this ground line communication here, and to ultimately take over Serbyanka. So this is the back door for a lot of Ukraine operations in this sector, and the Russians are trying to push in this forest again. So that is what's going on there. Going on over towards Chasiv Yar. For the most part, the Russians hold on to a lot of the city. A lot of it is still contested, but as you can see, I would easily assess 80 to 90% of the urban area is under Russian control. So, but that's about it. Nothing really new. They've been fighting for 11, 12 kilometers between Bakhmut and Chasiv Yar for what 3 years now. So, yeah, pretty slow. Most of Turetsk is now either under Russian control or contested here. Russians are slowly trying to move towards the south boroughs of Konstantinivka, but that could take another few months at least. Nothing really new in that sector. They are just they're trying to level the front here so they can have a shorter front so they can start moving people around a little bit more. Okay, so the worrisome development in this area is what's been going on in Pokrovsk. The Ukraine's been doing pretty well in the urban center itself. The Russians did successfully infiltrate some areas and some sabotage and recon groups into the urban area, but there was the forgot the name of the reaction group. I think it was like the Seventh Reaction Corps or something like that. It doesn't matter. They sent us some airborne guys. They mopped up and basically killed or captured all of them. I guess is from the reports I'm hearing. So that's good. Southwest is being held pretty good. A lot of it is still contested. As you can see, over the last few months, the Russians did push out from Shevchenko again and are back in some of these forest line areas in Zorove also. Russians are trying to assault into the city itself now. And we know how bad they usually do in urban areas. So maybe that's what the Ukrainians are trying to do now. The reason why I say that, though, is because unfortunately over the last week, the Russians had a successful breakthrough, which went through this area right here. The Russians are trying to reach to this highway right here and into this highway right here, which is another ground link communication that goes to Slovyansk and Kramatorsk. So that is the Russian push right now. Let me bring up one bit of information here that so the way it's being reported by the Russians and being amplified by all their outlets is that this is ground permanently taken. So I like to wait and see because we're in an information war as much as the battlefield almost it feels like, but the result of this isn't as bad as they're reporting, I believe. Let me just bring up my source here. So this is it's gonna be in Cyrillic, so it's gonna be a little harder to kind of compare here, but I'm try to do my best here. So let me bring that up real quick. The media viewer. Yeah, okay, there we go. Move that over here. Sorry, I gotta do all this. This is why I wish I had an engineer like Sam Hyde does. Just sit in my chair and bark at somebody to do all this for me. Anyway, so this is what's being reported by the Russians, though. So this is let me just go back to my window here and move my mouse around here. Okay. So this is Pokrovsk. This is Myanmar right here, and they're trying to push north, is what they're saying. But it's again, the people involved in this are just infiltrating into these areas because this is all recently taken ground by the Russians. Ukrainians are still setting up a defense, and these are just small infiltration groups, basically. Again, between 2 to 5 people typically. But they're saying, unfortunately, that they did penetrate, I think, 12 to 15 kilometers into some of these areas. So, depending on what you're looking at there, Deep State is the one that likes to early report everything because they have to be the big name and all the early reporting stuff. So the Russians use that against them, unfortunately, and say, well, Ukraine source Deep State says this, so therefore we are right, right? So due to branding issues, to say the least, with these people, they're over-reporting Russian gains to the detriment of morale, I would say, because it did cause, not I would say panic, but it certainly caused a reaction. Even Denis Davidov posted a video about this though too, and he doesn't really try to talk critically about the situation in Ukraine and the ground forces, but yeah, he's going to catch on to what catches fire, and then this right here shows the importance of this development if it was really that critical. So this is the backstop, how to put it, backstop fortifications that are being built up behind the fortress belt here. This is Konstantinivka, Slovyansk, all that. If the Russians were successful in penetrating this line right now, it would circumvent all this effort that Ukrainians have been trying to build up over the last year or two. So that's why, again, it's just news upon news that they're trying to sow this sort of thing and this panic in people. Um, so that anyway, so that's why it would have been so terrible if that did happen to the degree that the Russians are reporting. But obviously, I personally don't believe that's what's really going on. It's just again another bad case of people trying to affect the minds and morale of the support of Ukraine and American support for that area and European support, obviously. So, let's get back to the map here and wrap that part up here. Let me just get back to my OBS part of the map here. Okay. Move that over here. Okay. So that's why I kind of like using some of these more conservative maps. They don't overreport things to sensationalize the information that's coming on, because moving lines on map is what people get all worked up about. Actually, you know what? This would be a good time to use this old resource I have. This is a Finnish map called Blackbird Group, and if they've been keeping track of this, I can show you the fortifications there a little bit better. I haven't used these guys in a while because they are sometimes good with it. I think the tools show the fortifications, UA fortifications, and let's try this one right here. Okay. Yeah, so they're reporting this right here, and I'm trying to bring up the fortifications. All right, there we go. Okay, so it doesn't really show what we have on the map there, unfortunately, but these are so the blue lines, this is a kind of an eye gouging amount of information here. The blue lines are fortifications. The Russians pushing through this area, if they were so successful, would be breaking through a lot of these built-up fortifications here, and that would obviously cause problems. But we did report them moving into this area from Pischane into Pokrovsk here, but again, I think this is obviously a contested area, but that's the problem with a lot of these lines on map stuff. Russians move into any area they think it's just under their control with men on the ground in those areas. So anyway, that is that for that map. And let's go on Pokrovsk. So it's difficult. It's not critical, but it's certainly interesting though, because there's one really. Oh, let's see what we got here for this. Yeah, some Russian remote mining. The only real safe ground line communication would be this one right here that runs from Solovyanka to Pokrovsk now. Russians have feet on the ground on this one. Obviously, they've had that for a few months. But these two were supposed to be the safe ones, but since the Russians got through this area, that's become increasingly tenuous for the Ukrainians. So, with the Russians just moving into this area, it's going to be an interesting fight. The Russians have been moving in a new group called the Rubicon Group of how to put it. It's just called the Rubicon Group. They are the centralized, trained up drone professionals, air quotes there, for the Russians though, and they have had some effect in Chasiv Yar, and now there are reports of them operating in Pokrovsk with mainly most of their target sets. This was off a video I'm using for a source here. Is mainly logistics and EW stuff. Basically, they're trying to lower Ukrainian EW defenses so their glide bombs can be more effective, and hitting logistical nodes so that way the defenders don't have enough time or, well, enough comfort to rotate their guys out or enough ammunition to defend their areas. Yeah, so that's the idea. So whereas the Ukrainians are trying to target personnel, command centers, communication nodes, that sort of thing, both nations have some overlap in some of their target sets, but different reasons because one's on the offense, one's on the defense. So I thought that was fairly interesting. But yeah, so they have set up some effective drone control over this ground communication to some extent. There was one guy I was watching. I think he's from. I don't think it was a Kiev Independent. It was some other guy. He had to drive 120 miles an hour down this road, and 700 meters into the town, there is a drone net over the road where the drones don't really can't penetrate, obviously. But there was a fiber optic cable drone just outside that net canopy, and it was chasing them for a while. And according to him, one of his comrades in the back of the truck shot it, and it went down, and they were safe. But then they finally got to this area, and then they're like, okay, everything's fine, everyone's cool. But yeah, the drones are reaching longer and longer distances, though, so that's what's really kind of crazy. And that was also the new tactic of both the Ukrainians and Russians, sitting their drones down in predictable paths of egress and escape, right? When they see a target, they'll turn on the blades again and start flying again and take after them. They're not just hovering anymore. They're just sitting in wait quietly now. So it's kind of interesting. Nothing really new here. Kind of the same stuff. Um, really interesting stuff happening out of Kamyansky. This is the only real stuff happening in Zaporizhia. The Ukrainians supposedly counterattacked really well in this sector and pushed into some sectors of Kamyansky. Now I'm hearing, again, depending on which source you're looking at, the Russians moving in and taking Stefano-Hirsk. But again, I would say it's just contested back and forth counterattacks on both sides there. But we're only looking at maybe 5 kilometers distance here between both sides. Not even that, like 3. So you figure like barely over a mile and a half of just space here. That is actually fairly critical though, because they got the river right here, and then what's happening on both these villages here is the rivers that are supposed to be defending both these areas. So the more the Russians can leapfrog across these river defenses, the closer they get to Zaporizhia city. So anyway, and nothing new out of the Delta here. That's about it. So yeah, that does it for the map, guys. Let me just check on chat really quick and see if we have any questions or comments or observations or remarks. At least we don't speak German. Yeah, says do you want to be on Rumble? And then yeah, I think everyone's just kind of chilling out right now. All right, let's get on to the PowerPoint, guys, and push on with the regular show here. Okay, let me do my OBS stuff in the background here as usual. And there we are, and there we go. Okay, so we're covering from the 4th to the 10th, which is last Sunday. And let's get off to it. I didn't include anything for the Middle East or Africa or anything this week just because there's enough other stuff going on in Ukraine. Okay, so going on with the border right now, guys. Ukraine forces likely struck a railway infrastructure in Volgograd Oblast on August 4th, causing fires at a control station in Frolovo, which damage also reported to a high voltage power line in the Archida rail station in that area. The governor from Volgograd claimed multiple drums caused 5 train delays. Further fires reported at the rail station in Surovikino on August 6th and 5th. Russian sabotage activity in the Sumy direction has decreased but continues nonetheless. Russian drones reportedly equipped with PTM-5 anti-tank mines, which is a new one for me anyway, are being used for remote mining along Ukrainian routes. Ukrainian drones hit the Bimpsky oil refinery in the Krasnodar Oblast and destroying a gas processing unit, which lowered the refinery process. Which that refinery by itself refines 2.1% of Russia's oil. So that is it for the borders. Kharkiv front, guys. Poor weather is limiting Russian drone-supported ground attacks. There's intensified fighting near Lipsy, which is right here, but again, no real movement on the map. Ukrainian forces repelled on August 4th a Russian attempt to seize the Hoptivka border checkpoint despite poor weather. They were using drones against infantry and thermal imaging ponchos. Russian forces concentrated more forces in the Vovchansk direction, which they're still using fire teams of 3 to 5 people with heavy drone support and fiber optic sleeper drones along ground line communications, like I told you about that Pokrov's story there. Armor still being used for troop transport in larger assaults in this direction. So, over in the Luhansk guys, there are fewer assaults in recent weeks, and artillery and drone strikes are increasing. Russian use of motorcycles, ATVs, and electric bikes for fast, low signature assaults in the Kupiansk and Liman sectors still. Reserve forces deployed in the Liman area are estimated to be around 20 to 35. I'm sorry. Reserve forces are being deployed in this area, so it'd be like your BARS units. And the estimated casualty in this area is about 25 to 30 casualties a day in those areas. The Oscar River crossings are being attempted via rubber boats, and Ukrainian forces destroyed armored vehicles in the Kupiansk Vuzlovy direction. And the largest recorded motorcycle assault in that area, which included 25 vehicles, was repelled near Torsk, which would be Stibrovy, Turny, Torsk right here. Sorry. And I got 2 pages for Donetsk guys. As you see, I'm just trying to make it more concise because breaking down anything I used to, I feel like I was over delivering information. So I'm trying to give you the thrust of the situation in these areas much more concisely. If you guys want more information, let me know. I'm more than willing to do that. Just depends on how much time I have to put into it. In the Croft sector, we're going to break down the axes of effort in the Donetsk front one by one here. So it's the main effort for the Russians right now. Ukrainian and Russian sources agree Pokrovsk remains Russia's highest priority objective in the entire front. Siersky reports over 110,000 Russian personnel concentrated in the Pokrovsk sector alone, as the highest density of forces of any axis. That would be roughly 1/6 of all, at least 1 in 6 Russians are operating in that area. Russian forces are attempting a double envelopment from northeast and southwest to cut Ukrainian ground line communications into Pokrovsk and Myrnarod. So the interesting thing about the situation in both these areas is that these are kind of what would you say? I'm trying to remember the word for that. Complementary envelopments here. They're causing 2 difficult situations for the Ukrainians here. Konstantinivka is I wouldn't say semi-enveloped, but there is a southern area that now has 3 sides to its southeast there. Pokrovsk being more or less enveloped. Again, it's very tenuous with the Russians in this arm right here. I could say that the Ukrainians might counterattack in that area like we saw up in Kupiansk, maybe taking 1 or 2 villages to really fuck up that area like they did in the southwest of Pokrovsk, which really stabilized the area. So we might see some sort of action there since they moved in that airborne reaction force, cleaned up the interior of Pokrovsk from those sabotage groups, being redirected to that salient right there. Just a thought. Russian forces are okay. We talked about that. Assault tempo in this area. Constant small fire team attacks, 2 to 5 soldiers again. Often infiltrating through wooded areas or gray zones, entrenching inside forest or near rear areas. Sorry. Weather impact: cloudy and rainy days, slightly reduced drone activity, but drones remain a major threat within a 10-kilometer wide kill zone along the Pokrovsk front line. The Russian Rubicon Center for Advanced Unmanned Technologies is directing drone operations in that sector, training new units and deploying specialist teams to disrupt Ukrainian logistics and targeting routes. The use of drone swarms was reported one recon UAV releasing multiple FPV drones to attack from multiple angles on a single target area. So they're learning from the Ukrainians in that sense, because the Ukrainians were the ones developing the mothership concept of drone warfare. So when you can have a larger drone deploy, say 2 to 4 drones, and have them come from 4 different directions on one target, you can easily overwhelm local defenders in that case with precise attacks. Attacks are increasingly deceptive in this area. Russian troops sometimes wear civilian clothes or Ukraine-style patterns for infiltration. This obviously being an act of perfidy under international law, which is a war crime. So that's how, in some cases, they might have actually even made some advances in this local area in Pokrovsk. In the Toretsk sector, Russian forces are attacking from multiple axes, aiming to disrupt logistics into Toretsk and Sherebenivka. Russian claims partial control of the Klibin-Bik reservoir area, and Ukrainian sources confirmed intensified artillery and drone fire in that area. Russian formations are using unmanned ground vehicles alongside armored vehicles viewed as expendable troops taxis, rather than assets to preserve. Yeah, assaults generally are small scale but sustained, wearing down Ukrainian defenses in contested gray zones. I did see a thing from Covert Cabal this morning about um, the Russian tank uh, numbers that are left. Uh, they're all in very poor conditions from what he was saying. Not to say that Russians are at zero tanks, because they never will be, but their replenishment is not keeping up with losses. Even at the decreased amount of usage that they are employing on the front, though, which is also again correspondingly having a higher casualty rate in just the first half of this year. Um, yeah, which is why year on year the Russians are having such higher casualties, is because they're having fewer vehicles to transport people in. So that is one effect where material does preserve some life when you don't have the autoloaders blowing up on their tanks. But at the same time, when the Russians are relying on infiltration tactics, you're relying on just pure luck and attrition at that point, and just random luck for them to get anywhere. So anyway, that's why they're using some of their vehicles, because they still need to preserve it for in the case of the contingency of that they get of them getting in a war with another NATO army, or if they have to roll into, say, Kazakhstan for whatever reason, in case he gets too friendly with China or India, because that might happen. All right, over the Seversk area, Russia's pursuing a pincer-shaped advance via Serebryanka and Dronivka to envelop Seversk from north and east. The Ukrainian 11th Army Corps reports Russian attempts to bypass via Horivka in the Serebryansk forest area, as we saw with some of the lines there earlier. Russia's taking a short tactical pause near Konstantinivka to prepare for the next phase, currently conducting 150 to 180 artillery strikes per day in that area, up from 5 to 10 earlier. The objective is to consolidate the front and increase pressure on the Konstantinivka area while disrupting Ukrainian logistics. In Chasiv Yar area, Ukrainian forces report multiple motorized assaults repelled on August 7th. Russia was relying heavily on drones to offset high armored losses from 2024. Ukrainian drone units destroyed 350 Russian drones in July across Chasiv Yar sector alone. And Ukrainian positions in the city remain intact. Russian claims of control are false. And Russian tactics involve repeated use of poorly equipped infantry and attritional attacks along predictable routes. And Novopavlivka direction, which is a little bit southwest of Pokrovsk, they're conducting attacks of up to 10 infantry soldiers using motorcycles for speed and concealment in greenery, fiber optic drones again, and there's varying degrees of training for troops in that area. The operational trends across the Donetsk sector. FPV drones have shifted from purely strike roles to logistical delivery systems in some areas, carrying ammo and supplies to frontline units. So it goes to show that even the Russians are rotating their own soldiers that well, obviously. Heavy concentration of drone warfare innovation, FPV fiber optic swarm tactics, and recon to FPV launch integration is now employed. Again, these are things being used by the Rubicon Group. Russian force quality is still mixed, blend of poorly trained recruits with small numbers of experienced troops and key assault teams, and persistent artillery, glide bomb, and drone strike used to soften defenses before small unit infiltration. And yeah, Ukrainian defense posture, they're holding key nodes like Pokrovsk, Chasiv Yar, Toretsk, Seversk, while countering infiltration with drone and artillery. So they're giving ground in some areas that are just vegetation and field, but holding most urban areas, because obviously Toretsk is not in that area. They're giving slow ground there in the Kramatorsk sector. Yeah. All right. Over to Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, you guys. It's my mouse again. Goodness. Russian glide bomb campaign continues to target civilian infrastructure. Russian forces conducted multiple glide bomb strikes on the night of the August 2nd to 3rd against a bridge connecting Korabel microrayon, which is in southwestern Kherson City, to the rest of the city. Ukrainian authorities confirmed no military targets were in the area. The strikes killed at least one civilian and damaged key infrastructure. And the Russian drone saturation along the southern axis. Ukraine Southern Defense Forces spokesman Colonel Voloshin stated that Russian forces field up to 250 drones per day in the Kherson direction and 200 in the Zaporizhzhia direction. Russian strikes are increasingly designed to establish a death strip. The Ukrainians call it the drone line, But this is mainly aimed at flattening structures along the Dnieper River to deny Ukraine troops cover. And Ukraine raids and defensive operations. Ukraine's GUR confirmed a successful July 28th raid into the Tendrysivka Spit, destroying the Zont EU system and Rosa radar site. We talked about this last week. Talked about the same thing with the tactical innovations, mixed units, thermal ponchos, and stuff like that. Ukrainian forces repelled a mechanized assault in Zaporizhia. This is some older information. I'm sorry you left it in there. But anyway, let's move on to the headlines here. So, quick little stuff here I want to talk about before we get to the deeper stuff later a little bit too. The Russian economy, there were some reports coming out about that recently, but the snapshot of that, though, is that sanctions pressure is having an effect on the rhetoric of the Russians here a little bit. In July 2025, oil revenue was down 33% year on year due to lower crude prices and ruble appreciation. So the ruble is actually gaining strength, which makes it harder for Russians to sell their oil because it's more valuable, which is it's the weird thing about money. But at the same time, Russia is losing market share because OPEC and mainly Saudi Arabia is producing more oil, lowering the cost and increasing supply of crude oil onto the market. So, and because of that, that is going to affect their federal budget, which will affect all the state-owned manufacturers and munitions and training and all that crap. And that oil accounts for 1/3 of the Russian federal budget. So, Duma members downplay the impact. They project resilience and tout alternative export markets like India. However, at the same time, Trump has imposed additional tariffs of 25% on Indian exports on August 6th over Russian oil purchases. And indicators point to a slowdown. GDP growth was below forecast in the first quarter, was about on par for the second quarter. And passenger car market down 25% year on year. There is reports of decreased consumer spending in the Russian economy, which is a major part of any GDP measurement of any nation's economy. So there is definite strain happening on the home front in Russia. Again, it's not really going to, I believe, affect anything. Unfortunately, it's going to really change the calculation of the Russian leadership, though. Ongoing combat and strikes. Ukraine has escalated deep strikes. They hit the Sahid warehouse in Tatarstan. They also hit the Afipsky refinery, the Saratov oil plant, and the Utka refinery, which was in Komi Republic, which is over 2,000 kilometers from the border. Ukrainians are just continuing to send these long-range drones downrange. And Russia launched a massive drone wave on the night of August 7th to 8th, which included 108 drones, including jet-powered Sahid drone, which was their Garan 3, I think, if I'm remembering that correctly, and for multiple directions. 26 hits in Kharkiv, Kyiv, Sumy, and Odessa Oblast on that night. And as a response to Trump moving those two nuclear subs into the coastline of Russia, which could be anywhere, um, Russia withdrew from the INF treaty that Gorbachev and Reagan signed way back in the day. Russia formally exits the INF Treaty on August 4th, which was framed as a move to respond to Trump's redeployment of U.S. nuclear subs towards Russia. Medvedev did issue vague nuclear threats earlier, but the Kremlin downplayed and leveraged nuclear rhetoric for reflexive control. And yeah, so this is kind of another issue with the way the world's going. A lot of these international agreements, honestly, I think anyone could say that anyone would like to see less nuclear weapons in the world, less tests of nuclear weapons. Um, but with the way the world's going, the way the diplomacy of Trump is kind of fucking up a lot of things. Um, the use of nukes, the rhetoric has to be tempered with people kind of taking the safety off their gun almost, and kind of saying, well, if you're going to do that, we're going to be ready for you. It's just threats upon threats, and that only increases tension and the maturity of better leadership to sign agreements to not have nuclear weapons pointed at each other is being rescinded in the manner that Trump and Medvedev are doing so also. Just as an example, makes the world much more unsafe. I don't really fear Trump or Medvedev motivating Putin to go to war with the United States, but at the same time, it's just like there are fewer guardrails now when these things should be propped up, and kept safe from bad decision makers. But it's not the way the world's working right now. Okay, so getting some more details here, guys. I have a GIF here that's going to kind of slide through things. Hopefully, if it works. PowerPoint's kind of weird that way. I have to kind of like play with it a little bit, and then we'll slide through the Russian attempts to seize the Ukraine fortress built through the years, and you'll have dates on the top left there while I read off some of the information here. Putin's proposal demands major Ukrainian concessions. Kind of went through some of the maps, but I'll get into some of the details here a little bit too. Bloomberg and Wall Street did report that Putin demands Ukraine cede all of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, including Ukrainian-held areas, Crimea in exchanging for freezing front lines in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. The sequence would force Ukrainian withdrawal before ceasefire, contradicting Trump and Zelensky's own stipulation on ceasefire must come first at all costs. So, which is really weird. It's just like, well, that would just make sense. You got to put down the guns before anything really happens. But Putin's not really proposing that. The proposal omits withdrawal from the ZNPP for the Russians and Russian positions in Kharkiv, Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk, and Mykolaiv. The two-phase plan would include Ukraine withdrawals from Donetsk, like we said, and Putin and Trump would agree on a peace plan, which would later be negotiated with Zelensky. So it's a bilateral agreement that would be kind of foisted upon Zelensky to, vote up or down on it, which is kind of stupid. At the same time, to the EU's credit, and I don't really say that too confidently, they have applied pressure back at Trump and the United States about how they have to be included in the security architecture of any post-war Ukraine, right? So the way it's working right now with arms purchases and supporting Ukraine is that I forgot where Vance was saying this though, but it does sound like the Europeans are going to be supporting the Ukrainians much more financially and be taking on much more of that burden. So good and bad. I mean, it is good to see that Europe's taking the mantle of personal responsibility for their own defense now. I think most people can agree with that. Even Europeans wanted that. It just took Trump to do that. Unfortunately, at the same time, the Europeans are not investing all of their money into the European defense industry. They're still buying American weapons in some cases, not the F-35 in a lot of cases, but at the same time, still buying American equipment to which they may or may not have to use permanently. I do want to see the Europeans kind of develop their own industries, renovate their own factories again, because Germany has a problem of a lot of old equipment in their factories. It's a whole different economic topic, but I won't get into that. The money that's been freed up through a lot of these negotiations recently is the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. Um, and it should be used in Europe for European products for European defense. Um, it shouldn't be sent to America for defense contracts that may or may not be fulfilled. Because, depending on the whims of whatever president might be in office, God forbid fucking Vance becomes president, might see more of that. So the Europeans need to cut the cord and make European armies great again, to say the least. But yeah, I'm sorry, that was kind of off the back of one little comment there about Zelensky and EU kind of talking up, pushing back on the whole Putin-Trump agreement here coming up on the 15th. So anyway, it's all this, it's just drama. I know it's politics, guys, but this is what's going to decide the fate of a nation of 40 million people. And the steps along the way are important for us to understand, though, because we're going to have to understand how we get to the final conclusion via all these steps that we're seeing develop right in front of us in the now. So, the strategic value of the fortress belt. Obviously, we've gone over that, but I'll go over a little bit more. Defensive line in Donetsk since 2014, Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhivka, and Konstantinivka. It's a 50-kilometer line. The pre-war population between all of them about 380,000 people. It's a key logistic hub and industrial base. Withstood Russian offenses in 2014 and 2022. And the current Russian assaults near Toretsk and Pokrovsk aim to envelop all of that. The loss would give Russia a shorter approach to Kharkiv and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast borders, requiring Ukraine to build new defenses and open less defensible terrain. That's the short of the long of that, though. So I thought this was a great gift just to kind of show you what's happened over the years, and how Ukraine's been able to basically hold a lot of this. Obviously, back in 2014, Slovyansk was temporarily held by the rebels, but then they got kicked out within 3 weeks. So anyway, Yeah, another map there, just kind of give you an impression of the area in contestation there. Information warfare and the Alaska Summit maneuvering that's been going on. Again, we talked about the confusion over Putin's true offer. There's multiple conflicting accounts from Western Ukraine sources. It was unclear whether Russia offered withdrawal from Kherson Zaporizhzhia or just a freeze in place. From Build, obviously we talked about Witkoff misunderstanding Putin's terms. And the Kyiv Independent said Putin floated goodwill withdrawal from parts of Kharkiv, Sumy if Ukraine cedes Donetsk. Um, Obviously, that would favor Russia. That's a bullshit deal where Russia would get, again, pre-war population cities of nearly 400,000 people for a handful of villages with probably barely 10,000, I would say. So the Ukrainians would not agree to that, I imagine. The Ukraine-EU counterproposal, which was put out on August 9th, full ceasefire before territorial talks, reciprocal exchanges and not unilateral concessions, and robust security guarantees to deter renewed Russian aggression, basically keeping the door open for NATO ascension for Ukraine. The Russian narrative goals ahead of the August 15th Alaska summit, which is to frame Ukraine, Europe as obstacles to peace and isolate the U.S. position there, which may or may not happen. Trump is very fickle in that whole gambit of things. Use the Alaska location to evoke Russian historic claims and symbolism, and condition Western media to accept Russia's demands as reasonable versus Ukraine's intransigence. And the domestic Russian messaging to their own audience is to reiterate the 2024 war claims. Again, the full seizure of all those four oblasts. Portray Putin as a decisive leader, dictating terms while Trump is emotional and inconsistent. Well, they're not too far off the mark on that one. Prepare public for failed talks by preemptively blaming Ukraine. There's also been some unfortunate rhetoric coming from Trump again about Ukraine being tough to negotiate with. But at the same time, Ukraine has only ever been in the affirmation of a full ceasefire, which is what Trump has proposed to. You know, I don't know. It's tough when you don't have an honest person as a statesman leading a country, because Trump's whim is what dictates the results of this whole thing sometimes, and it's frustrating. Anyway, it also chafes my sense of principle as a man, because you can't trust a man that can't keep his word, And if his word is dog shit, then the rest of he says isn't worth anything as well. Anyway, I'm trying to be PC for YouTube. I'll be much more frank on the back half of the show here once we get off YouTube for the evening. Russian military developments in this area, tactical shift away from mechanized assaults. We talked about this a little bit. Ukraine countermeasures in this area, new interceptor drones, which include the Mongoose bayonet and the Bessemar shotgun equipment, which are going to target high-speed Shaheeds and Garan drones. The autonomous guidance and multi-drone control systems are under development to offset Russia's massive production capacity. There's also Russian strike campaign capacity, which has been ongoing. Supposedly, the Russians are able to produce 100. Oh, sorry. Let me do that. Yeah, 170 Shaheeds per day, scaling to 190 per day by the end of the year. They've stockpiled about 600 Iskander M missiles, about 300 Iskander K missiles, which is about 2 years of strikes at current pace. And the goal is to build up to 2,000 drone strike packages for future mass attacks. And that does it for the headlines, guys. Let me just double check everything. Yep. Nothing really new for the mobilization from Russia, which is kind of odd because that stretches about 2 weeks of ISW not really reporting anything on that, though, which is interesting. Mobilization for Ukraine. NATO has launched the PURL mechanism for pooled funding of U.S. weapons to Ukraine, which would include Patriot systems and other air defense systems, ammo, spare parts for Bradleys and stuff like that. The U.S. has also approved a $104 billion dollar sustainment program for the M777 howitzers, and BAE Systems being as a prime contractor for that. EU has also approved a $3.2 billion tranche under the Ukraine Facility Program, and the UA has also revealed those interceptors we talked about. The bayonet in particular has a 250 kilometer an hour speed, 5-kilometer ceiling, and a 40-kilometer range. Autonomous target lock and multi-drone controlled network in development still. And the rear area stuff here, guys. Putin and Pushilin, who is the Des Pushilin, who is the head of the DPR, were so anyway, they met in a meeting that spotlit the worsening water crisis in occupied Donetsk. Some cities are only getting water only every 4 days. So we've been reporting from Mariupol a lot, which is kind of a lot of people's attention still in that city. The living conditions there are getting worse and worse, sounds like every month. And even Donetsk City. There's video coming from the Russian side from Russian civilians that live in the area. Well, Ukrainian civilians, you get what I'm saying. Where they're having to boil their own water in the dark of the night, this sort of thing. It's just they don't have plumbing, they don't have electricity, and they're just barely scraping by. I don't know why anyone would still live there, to be honest. It's just shit, and it's anyway. Civilians are resorting to collecting rainwater. Sanitation conditions are deteriorating, and the crisis is blamed on Ukraine despite Russian damage to infrastructure. Um, Russia has reduced water fees but fails to address the infrastructure collapse. They're prioritizing supply to military and officials over civilians still. Still a passportization effort by the Russians, which they're trying to force upon the Ukrainians. A few waivers for elderly stateless and orphans is being waived. Um, Parental rights are being tied to the Russian passports, and driver's license swaps are being required by January 2026. And there's still the asset seizure. On one particular case was Putin's personal banker, Arkady Rotenberg. The port of Yalta was privatized to that oligarch, as well as a broader pattern of rewarding loyalists with occupied assets to Putin's inner circle. Okay, so last thing here is a special thing that was reported by the Institute to Study War. This is a bit of a more highlight on their evolved drone war effort through the Rubicon Group. Russian UAV and partial BAI effects, which is battlefield impact. New Russian drone doctrine. Russians are integrating combined UAV tactics with FPV, fiber optic, loitering munitions, and AI-assisted recon drones. They're achieving partial battlefield air interdiction, which is the BAI, sorry, in disrupting Ukrainian logistics, rotations, and rear area movements up to 70 to 110 kilometers deep. This is enabled by PRC tech support, optics, electronics, AI modules, long fiber optic coils and engines, and scaled domestic production. The operational gains from drone interdiction include targeted ground-line communications from the Kramatorsk-Dobropilya Highway, and some others, which are being put under persistent FPV and Lancet fire control, which is requiring resupply often by foot. The kill zone is expanded from half a kilometer to 2 kilometers in 2025 to 10 plus kilometers in 2025. Sorry, sorry, you get what I'm saying. Half a kilometer to 2 kilometers in 2024 to 10 plus kilometers in 2025. Vehicles in the zone are often considered finished. 70% of Pokrov's sector injuries are coming from FPV attacks. Some sectors are seeing 2 to 3 vehicles hit daily, which would be soft-skin vehicles. Deep rear and infrastructure strikes. Fiber optic drones and the Molina FPVs are now hitting industrial hubs, hospitals, and enlistment offices in Kharkiv, Sumy, Kramatorsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson. The reason why they're hitting enlistment offices is to obviously keep the mobilization effort more difficult for the Ukrainians. There's also forced interdiction in the Serebyansky forest. Fiber optic drones are bypassing tree cover limitations, threatening hidden routes, because the fiber optic drones obviously add fidelity to the operator and the drone. The Recon UAV enabled Iskander missile strikes on training grounds very recently. There were 7 confirmed since November 2024. In the technology and tactics evolution by the Russians here, extended range, like we talked about. Lancet drones now have a range of 70 to 110 kilometers. And there are sleeper drones we talked about with the fiber optic drones, which hibernate for weeks with precision strikes sometimes. And the thermobaric FPV targeting dugouts, fortifications in the Sumy and Donetsk sectors have been hit. And there's coordinated strike packages with recon UAVs at mid-range repeater to extend those ranges to up to 300 kilometers. Repeaters are devices that are able to amplify and boost out RF from one point to their how to put it. It's called a transceiver, where it receives and transmits a signal. you'll have the transmitter at one end, probably from the operator's end, to that drone. It will piggyback that signal from its transceiver to the FPV drone that the operator is trying to operate a little bit further back. So typically, when you didn't have those drones with those repeaters, the range would be much more limited because it'd be, sometimes the line of sight on the horizon, stuff like that. Maybe if you have HF, it's a bit different. We'll get all the radio theory here, but by having a repeater from the operator to the drone, that extends the range of the drone, obviously. So kind of a midpoint for that whole thing to work. The Rubicon Center deployment, specialist Russian drone units being redeployed from Kursk to Donetsk, described by Ukrainian troops as a turning point in drone warfare capability for the Russians. Fielding FPV interceptors integrating ground assaults for combined arms effects. Ukrainian countermeasures and gaps in this effort. Anti-drone nets are being set up, like we talked about. The Shrike FPV interceptors, which cost $300 to $500 versus a few tens of thousands of dollars for the Shaheeds. Robotic gun modules and prototype reusable interceptors, which I'm still interested to see how you reuse a drone interceptor. There's limitations. The nets are defeated by swarms. Small arms are only effective versus fiber optic UAVs, and insufficient EW coverage to a depth of 30 to 40 kilometers. Because if they're going, 110 kilometers deep, your EW umbrella has to be that much deeper too, which you're going to be sacrificing. How to put it? You're going to be sacrificing intensity on the point of contact for depth. And if you can't cover the front, then the soldiers are going to be left more vulnerable. So, yeah, this is the whole deep war theory in action, basically. The strategic implications for this is that Russia's partial battlefield air interdiction advantage is technologically and tactically transient. This can be eroded if Ukraine fields low-cost kinetic interceptors and expands EW depth. People's Republic of China's covert support suggest adversary block is using Ukraine as a proving ground for future wars versus U.S. and allies. Without rapid adaptation, Ukraine risks losing maneuver in key fortress belt sectors under persistent UAV interdiction. So that is that for the PowerPoint, guys. Let me just check on chats here and see how people are doing. It's good to see Dan Simmons there. It's good to see you guys. And Shadowlay to Flash Gorgon there. Over on Rumble, things are pretty quiet. Yeah, and HP has been pretty quiet. I'm used to seeing a few hundred people there, maybe 1,000 sometimes. It's been pretty quiet over there, which is I'm finding interesting sometimes. Anyway, things are pretty normal. All right, let's go over to the articles I have left to show you guys. And let me do the stuff here to bring up the articles real quick. That should be it. So we saw this one. I will go to next one here. Russia attempts to downplay U.S. role in diplomatic breakthrough between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Almost a day after the summit between Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Washington, Maria Zakharova, which is the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesman, commented on it, saying the final settlement between Baku and Yerevan must take Moscow's opinion into account. Okay. Anyway, I just find that funny because they try to blow off Europe at the same time. Anyway, on the whole Ukraine issue. Zakharova paid little attention to the agreements between Azerbaijan and Armenia, but was quick to emphasize that they had repeatedly stated their unwillingness to seek outside help. Quote, it is worth recalling that the current stage of the Armenia-Azerbaijan normalization began with the direct assistance and central role of Russia, the spokeswoman of the Russian Foreign Ministry continued. She also said that the, quote, optimal option, quote, for resolving the conflict in the South Caucasus should involve only the countries of that region and its neighbors, Russia, Iran, and Turkey. That is not the United States. Quote, we will additionally analyze Washington's statements regarding the unblocking of regional communications. In this area, the trilateral agreements involving Russia remain relevant, and other parties have withdrawn from them, Zakharova emphasized, recalling the presence of Russian border guards in Armenia, which did nothing, which I talked about earlier. So, it's just interesting. At least the United States can still do things. It was a kind of a big takeaway from the Iran bombing. Us bombing the Iranian nuclear facilities. Um, I think a lot of people stood up and noticed that, obviously. But Russia just doing this shit again, it comes off as flaccid and dumb. I don't know how else to put it. They didn't stop anything from happening in Armenia. They saw other Christians being killed and ethnically genocided, and the big bad neighbor with all the nuclear weapons in the world, supposedly, didn't do jack shit, and they just left and watched it all happen. So I don't know. We talked about this a little bit. Zelensky on territorial swap. We will not give our land to the Russian occupier. Long story short, his reply to the idea that Trump's been floating of territorial swaps with Russia. He says he can't do that because it's in the Ukraine Constitution, where it would have to be put to a vote and a referendum for that even to happen. So it's not his decision to make. Which, if you're a Democratic sympathizer, that's the Democratic way of doing it, putting it to the vote to lose your land, I guess. But at the same time, it's kind of a neat little diplomatic ploy of like, well, that's not my decision to make. I have to hand it off to another decision body, in this case, the Ukrainian Rada. So, anyway, obviously, I don't think any politician would willingly vote to cede their own um, constituents to another nation. So that's just kind of an interesting little political coup there, or diplomatic coup, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Wall Street Journal blocked that. This was the Reuters article on the Trump meeting and Putin, all that stuff. We'll get past that. This is the Bild article. I'll just leave it on this last thing here. So, kind of just talking about American stuff before we get to the break here real quick. Trump authorized the use of army against foreign drug cartels. This has been kind of making the rounds in some smaller war news outlets. U.S. Donald Trump signed a directive authorizing military operations against drug cartels that the U.S. administration classifies as foreign terrorist organizations, or FTOs. The New York Times reports with reference to the people's familiar with the matter. Sorry. The directive allows the U.S. Army to conduct military operations at sea and in foreign countries. Kind of a Monroe Doctrine, if you will. The newspaper notes that the directive requires a legal assessment, as it is unclear how the law will treat the elimination of civilians who do not pose an immediate threat but are suspected of committing criminal offenses. Prior to that, Trump deployed the National Guard and troops to the southwestern border to stem the flow of drugs and immigrants. In addition, he has stepped up drug surveillance and interdiction efforts. In February, the State Department designated Trendy. I'm so bad at saying these things sometimes. Araguaia, MS-13, and several other groups as foreign terrorist organizations, saying that they pose, quote, a threat to national security beyond that posed by traditional organized crime, unquote. On Thursday, the Department of Justice and the State Department announced that the United States government was doubling the reward up to $50 million for information linked to the arrest of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, also who has been facing drug trafficking charges, though. So, in a weird way, Trump's kind of declaring the Monroe Doctrine alive and well against South America, which again is just kind of saying one thing and doing another. Don't get me wrong, as an American, this is the right thing to do. At the same time, he said he wasn't going to get us involved in another war. For people that sometimes listen to Peter Zeihan, he is increasingly irrelevant in my mind because he's, another one of those political scientist celebrities. Kind of what was that black guy that did the science shit for a while? I forgot his name. These like subject area matter experts are yeah. You guys, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, guys. It's been a long day. I didn't really sleep too well last night. Um, it's been a blazing hot on the West Coast. Anyway, I'm doing my best to keep things going. Anyway, point being is that oh god, I just said his name. Peter Zeihan, sorry. He was saying in one of these TED Talks that the next war is going to be in Mexico. He went into a little bit. It's actually a fairly good talk. If you want to learn more about that, it's actually fairly interesting. Um, with what's been going on with the fentanyl crisis, drugs, human trafficking, the anarcho-narco state crap going on with the Mexican state itself. Mexico, by and large, is a failed state of 140 million people. And with 50, 60 million of them living here in America, um, they're not not um, you can't take them out of the equation. So if things are going to be popping off and we're going to have a season of footage coming from Mexico where there are CIA agents or American Marines or Mexican Marines in many cases, it already does happen, of civilians being shot because of American intervention. You might see another angle of not BLM but MLM, if that makes sense. Or I guess it'd be Beaner's Lives Matter if you want to do the BLM thing again, but that's just kind of a joke anyway. It would create a kind of a political crisis here, and the Democrats would certainly capitalize on that, though, because that would be a racial issue, and that would just push a lot of Latino voters back into the DNC and kind of galvanize them a little bit more. But at the same time, as a white American, uh, which drugs have really fucked up the white community in America, obviously with the fentanyl and opioids and all that crap. Anything that is able to stem that flow is good. That is something that's going to increase the welfare of our community. And at the same time, militarizing the border should have been done decades ago. I don't know how America's terrible at nation building. We can't even do it with mountain people in the middle of Central Asia, which should be a fucking layup for us. But 20 years and trillions of dollars later, it took them 2 weeks to take back their country from us. So, doing it in Mexico, I would say it's a no-go, obviously, because you're dealing with a much larger population. And the consequences of that would be not only south of the border, but also domestic. We would see a lot of disruption economically, not only political, but economical, social, some would even say religious, I would say, if it gets that bad. But I don't know. It's another one of these potential flashpoints, I think, that could really spark into something bigger, at least domestically speaking, because people are divided in this country, and the sort of direction that Trump wants to take the immigration issue is needed. I think this is going to be a painful thing, however, but we should not be blind to the consequences of something like this, though. It can probably affect a lot of people personally in some way. Uh, it's entirely speculative how that can go, but I just wanted to bring this up to you guys, though. So it does seem that, again, um, military operations against what the U.S. sees as civilians is kind of another weird caveat to this whole thing, too. I kind of view that as a antiquated notion of how to wage war. We're entering a new era where the Middle East is going to have perpetual warfare, because that's how they do warfare. The West is having to remilitarize itself because it had the weirdest, most unhistorical period in its entire history period, where you have no wars in Europe for decades. Um, People are going to have to come out of that malaise and that lack of inertia, and just kind of know what it is to be masculine, to be in the military, to have a sense of duty, loyalty, and courage to defend your people and your land again. While at the same time trying to appraise what's going on in the world again. Um, the problem with the liberal idea of what the world is that mankind can evolve into just a peaceful individual set of human beings, right? Obviously, that died decades ago. Take your pick of what event you want to point that as being the final marker of that, the end of that idea. But again, the consequences are manifesting themselves all around us like mushrooms in a dark, wet room, and they're just sprouting. And now we're having to deal with all this at the same time. That was a weird metaphor. I get that, but anyway. Um, but back to that elimination of civilians, though. I thought that was a really weird way to put it. Because I'm not going to say these guys are civilians. Um, they wear their uniform on their skin, right? I mean, they tattoo themselves and all their gang paraphernalia, their gang affiliations, all that crap. That's their uniform. That is a sign of their dedication to their unit, to their cause, if you will, the lifestyle, whatever you want to put it. But that is who they are. They don't wear uniforms. They don't wear um, chest candy, as people in the military used to call their decorations on their chest. I mean, they have ranks, but their sense of duty is profit, um, and the rivalry they have against each other is much more. I mean, even piranhas don't eat their own. But you get what I'm saying, though. These things eat their environment around them, though. It's the drug culture is poison. Um, and it destroys everything around it, though, too. So anyway, I think over time the legal definition of civilians is going to have to evolve. We're going to see a much larger legal target set, I think, for what constitute or what would be qualified as a combatant. Or I don't have obviously the right verbiage right now, but these people are not innocent. They're not civilians. They should not be given legal protection of any case. These people are, how to put it, they meditate on how to profit at our expense through drugs, human trafficking, and kinetic exchanges. If it gets that bad, they are non they are foreign non-state actors, I think is another way people put it. Um, and they are a danger not only to Mexico but also to us. So again, I'm not a legal mind, but this obviously you look at these guys like, okay, yeah, those are bad people. We should keep them away. Maybe even do what needs to be done with groups like this. So anyway, good step forward, but there are so many doors leading to danger. I think domestically in America dealing with this sort of issue, and that's because we didn't deal with it soon enough. So I don't know. I would love to get your guys' thoughts on that. If it takes a minute on the other side of the intermission, yeah, please chime in. I just think that's really just kind of the next domestic issue going to be going forward here. Anyway, all right, guys, we'll come right back after the intermission and show some Warcast combat footage for everyone on YouTube. This is where we say goodbye, and we'll